Hi, everybody. Before the episode, just a quick announcement. City of the Future will be at the Brooklyn Podcast Festival on January 12th, and we'd love to see you there. Also, stay tuned at the very end of this episode for a little announcement on the future.
New York, 1989.
The trash was piling up.
Garbage is coming. It's out there. You can't keep it away. No matter how you turn your head, put the pillow over your head. Let me put it this way. America and New York will either solve the garbage crisis because we start now, or we will solve the garbage crisis in hysteria at 20 times the cost and at 20 times the environmental damage.
The city tried to solve the trash problem by enacting Local Law 19, mandating that all buildings and businesses reduce their waste by recycling.
And there was one man whose job was to figure out how to make it happen.
It took us 3 years of flat-out work.
Benjamen Miller. Today, he's an accomplished author and waste consultant. But at the time, he was at the New York City Department of Sanitation.
I was project manager and primary author of the plan, and we just needed to come up with how to sort things, what materials and which piles. And we came up with metal, glass, plastic, and paper.
Other small towns who had already implemented recycling mandated the use of rigid containers, those blue bins.
But Benjamen didn't want everyone in New York City to have to go out and buy a bin.
We're trying to make things as simple as possible, so we said we'll go to bags.
New Yorkers already used black trash bags for their garbage, so Benjamen introduced clear and blue bags for recycling.
You can still see the cheap plastic bags that Benjamen introduced on the streets of New York today.
When recycling first started, and I'd walk down my residential block, which is a dense block, and I'd look at these bags of these blue and clear bags, I'd think, wow, look at those recycling rates. Look at this participation. This is fantastic. And then the scales fell off my eyes.
As any New Yorker, including Benjamen, can tell you, bags have had frustrating side effects. Every trash or recycling pickup day, a New York City sidewalk becomes about 3/4 bags and 1/4 sidewalk.
And as if that weren't injury enough, there's the added insult. These bags are smelly, and rats love them.
Over time, as I've watched sanitation workers pick them and sorting through these different colors and cleaning up the broken bag and seeing the rats scurrying around and seeing ever higher accumulations of bags, I realized this was a really bad idea. Our streets have become, a complete mess. My mistake was not thinking expansively enough.
Okay, so how should we think?
I would say, really think big about how things could be changed.
That's exactly what we're going to do in this episode.
Welcome to City of the Future, a new podcast from Sidewalk Labs.
Each episode, we explore one idea or innovation that could transform our cities. I'm your host, Eric Jaffe.
And I'm Vanessa Quirk.
And in this episode, we were exploring an idea that could solve our garbage crisis.
Closing the recycling loop.
We have to think big about recycling. We're in the middle of a crisis.
For decades, nearly half the world's waste has been sent to China to be processed.
Until January, when it started banning some recycled imports.
When China banned the import of 24 different types of paper and plastic.
Many of the things we make a big effort to recycle.
Before the China trash ban, a ton was worth $100. Today, much of it has nowhere to go. The trash is piling up as sorters work to make the output cleaner.
Blankets, pillows, a lot of things that really shouldn't end up in the stream to begin with.
The rate that China is now mandating is 0.5% contamination. Is that even possible?
In my opinion, it's not. This is what happens when you rely on another country and they decide that they don't want your stuff anymore.
I think that China was making a lot of concessions for a very long time, which skewed the fact that they were just solving our trash problem.
That's Emily Kildow, Associate Director of Sustainability here at Sidewalk Labs. Before Sidewalk, Emily spent over a decade making New York City buildings more sustainable, most recently at Google's New York campus.
As Sidewalk, she's got a mission to make recycling easier so less of it ends up in the landfill. Because right now, cities are failing pretty miserably.
So here's how recycling is done in places like New York and Toronto. You take your glass, metal, plastic, sometimes paper, cardboard, into bags or boxes and put it on the curb or the edge of your street. Then a recycling truck comes to the curb and takes it to a place called the Material Recovery Facility, or a MRF, a big warehouse that takes all of your waste and sorts it into its individual waste streams. And then that's shoveled or put on conveyor belts that then goes through this really, really loud mechanical room, basically, that has all of these different old school technologies like rumble strips that kind of knock out cardboard and screen out glass and small fines. You're using mechanics to take things out and separate them as much as possible. But then there's a second layer where people come in and start to actually pick apart and sort all of the dirty contaminants out of those waste streams.
That sounds pretty gross.
That is pretty gross. It's all kinds of gross, which is why it's so important to have clean recycling. If everything went in clean and rinsed, it wouldn't be gross. It'd be much easier to separate.
Some MRFs across the country are trying to help people separate with robots and computer vision.
If you're a super technologically advanced kind of MRF, then you potentially would have something like a robot that would also use computer vision to sort through specific types of waste.
With computer vision, robots can distinguish aluminum cans, plastics, cardboard, and pluck them off the conveyor belt with suction cups. But there are some limitations to this burgeoning technology. Picking out recyclables from non-recyclables is a lot harder than it sounds, even for the best robot in the world.
If it sees a can with a Coca-Cola logo on it and it knows that and it's able to pick that up, but it's not covered in gravy or chili or whatever it is, then it would be able to pick it out. So the technology is reliant on a clean source.
And that just means you and me cleaning up our recycling.
Yeah, that's the most important part. The individual user is the source separator. That's where it all becomes the cleanest.
So what's happening now with China is actually forcing us to do something that we should have done decades ago.
Right. It means that you and me, we have to learn how to get better at separating our recycling from our waste.
Well, how are we going to do that?
Yeah, are you done with that sandwich?
Yeah.
You know what? I think we need to get Emily again. She said she was going to be in the kitchen, so let's go.
To the kitchen.
We have a paper bin, we have a plastic, metal, and glass bin, a trash bin, and the fourth bin is an organics bin.
So I just wanted to throw away my lunch, and now I'm really confused. This looks like an aluminum wrapper that maybe I would put in the plastic, metal, and glass slot here because it's kind of metal.
Right, and if that was aluminum foil that was just straight metal, then that would be true.
Okay.
But if you open up that little wrapper...
So I also have, my surprise was that I also had a little food in here.
Oh, well, there's multiple things that we need to talk about then, Eric. Let's first start with the fact that that's not metal.
This is
right?
not aluminum. So how am I supposed to know that?
I know that's really confusing.
Shiny.
It is a combination. It is a metal-coated paper.
Okay.
Which then renders it not recyclable, unfortunately.
All right, Vanessa's laughing at me, but what would you have done in this situation?
I probably would have put it into the metal as well. I would have made the same mistake.
Just without the tomato.
It's shiny. How does that not look like a metal?
It is confusing. That is not metal or paper, so therefore it is trash.
Okay, so my napkin that I used earlier,
that napkin,
I can put in organics?
You can put in organics, yes.
It would be better in organics than paper.
Correct.
Because it got orange juice on it.
Right.
Okay.
Like, is there a default that I should choose that's the best of the worst situations? How do I go about that?
I think that the best default is the simplest. So if you're confused by it, it's probably trash. Even if you put it in the wrong spot and the condition was good, you're still now taking that on a little trip to the MRF, and then the MRF is going to separate and go through all of this labor and energy to sort it out and then go, no, that's landfill. And then it's going to have to go back to the landfill versus you just throwing it in the correct bin in the first place, and then it doesn't have to take those extra trips. It doesn't contaminate. It's less energy to sort. People don't want to throw things in the trash. They want to recycle them. Right. So it being confusing actually makes more problems on the recycling side.
People want to recycle. They don't want to throw things away, even if putting things in the trash is better for the recycling facility. But fortunately, there are ways we could get people to recycle better.
One of the most compelling solutions comes from the world of behavioral science.
We focus on applying all of the sort of wonderful insight from the behavioral sciences in really concrete and practical ways to make government services work better for people.
That's Sasha Tregebov. He works for an innovative consulting company called the Behavioral Insights Team, world-renowned for implementing something that behavioral scientists call nudges.
Sasha, tell us what a nudge is.
Let's say you've got some healthier snacks and you've got some less healthy snacks. By putting the less healthy snacks in a jar that's not transparent, that's sort of harder to see what's in there, you may actually influence the choices that people make. You haven't restricted them from having the gummy bears. If they're really motivated to eat some gummy bears, they can still do it. But maybe if they're sort of 50-50 on the fence between a healthier snack and the gummy bears, they'll pick the healthier snack. And that's a sort of canonical example of what a nudge is. That doesn't limit the options that people have available to them. It doesn't constrain what they're able to do, but it helps them make the decisions that they'd really want to make.
The first ever nudge unit started in the UK. At the time, the British government had a problem. Despite sending taxpayers letter after letter, some people weren't paying their taxes on time. So the nudge unit came up with an idea. They added a simple statistic to the letter. 9 out of 10 British citizens do pay their taxes on time.
And adding that one sentence to letters ended up bringing forward hundreds of millions of pounds in revenue over the following years.
That's insane. I mean, what is it about our brains that would make us more motivated by that than just the deadline?
We like to talk about a really simple framework for understanding the core sort of fundamental principles of behavioral science, and we call it the EAST framework.
Okay.
So if you really want people to behave in a certain way, make that behavior easy, that's the E, make it attractive, make it social, and make it timely. Because these are the factors that really influence how people make decisions and behave.
Okay, an acronym, that's great. So easy, attractive, social, timely, EAST.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the E. Can you tell me about easy?
Let's say I've, I hope this isn't indelicate, used up my toilet paper.
Okay.
Right? And I've got that little cardboard roll that's left.
Yes.
And I'm in the bathroom and I want to dispose of this little cardboard roll. It's a little bit of friction for me to go and walk that out to the kitchen if I'm not going there anyways and deposit it in the recycling bin. So what happens? We put it in the trash, right? And something that could have been recycled isn't. So what are these little solutions we could have in our own homes? What's the little divider or the smaller bags that we might be able to put in our bin so that everywhere we make recycling, we can put recycling so that it ultimately gets to the right place? So searching and destroying those little moments of friction can really have a dramatic impact in what people do.
Yeah, I mean, my roommates don't even change the toilet roll with a new toilet roll, let alone properly recycle the cardboard tube. So I guess that's because it's too much friction, not convenient enough.
It's a whole other opportunity for nudging, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times people sort of summarize some key findings from behavioral science in terms of saying that people are lazy. And there's some truth there, but I sort of really push back against that. I would say our brains are amazing at conserving our energy and attention. We are
a beautiful way to put it.
Great at finding shortcuts. And in fact, I would argue that life would in fact be impossible if our brains didn't find these shortcuts, right? But it's not totally wrong to say that we're sort of lazy by design and we're really good at it.
Right. And because we're so good at being lazy, at conserving our brain energy, it makes sense that the first letter in the EAST framework would be easy, right? But I want to get to the S, because that one's really interesting to me, the social element. How does that work when it comes to recycling?
People can't see what we do. We can't see what others do. If you live in a single family home, you might be able to see whether your neighbor brings their recycling bin out to the curbside.
Right.
But that's really about it. In an apartment building, you might not even know that, right? And so our recycling behavior is invisible from each other. And that means those social influences, that positive peer pressure, those social norms are much less present for us. They exert much less of a potentially positive influence on the choices that we make.
Okay, right, because you're not getting that social feedback, like in the tax letters that you sent out, where you said, hey, most people are doing this. So if you're not going to send a letter, then what are the other ways that you can provide social feedback?
So we ran a study in the UK that basically had the waste collectors leave a door hanger. So like a little, it's like a paper thing that goes over your door handle.
Like in the hotel, it says do not disturb.
Yeah, totally, right? So like the do not disturb sign on people's houses that sort of said, hey, notice you didn't put out your recycling.
So do disturb.
This week. yeah, exactly.
Do note that your recycling was inaccurate.
So that's like a nice way to provide feedback. And, we did see some increases in participation rate among households that did receive those. I think the provision of feedback is really, really powerful when it comes to making an invisible behavior more visible.
What about the last letter in the framework, the T for timely? What does that mean exactly? Am I nudged in the moment as I'm recycling?
So when I recycle something that's not recyclable, that fact is completely invisible to me. Nobody tells me, right? Nobody little pops up out of my, recycling bin or the chute in my apartment building is like, no. Right? And so, could there be feedback? Can I get feedback on whether what I'm doing is right or wrong? I think it would just be incredible if there was some world in which I put something in the recycling and I learned that thing was not recyclable at that moment. But certainly we're not getting the sort of fine-grained data that we would need for personalized feedback, which I really think needs to happen at the household level, because that feedback is much more powerful when it's directly related to your behavior. Great to let me know how my neighborhood's doing, probably not nearly as powerful as letting me know how my family, how I am doing.
And how I stack up against my neighbors.
Yeah, and you can think about going further, right? In my ideal world, I have this whole gamified household level feedback system where you're earning badges and those badges are displayed on your porch or whatever. Maybe I'm sort of getting carried away here. I'm on floor 12 of my building. We've got a competition with floor 13 on whose waste diversion number can be the highest.
And I'm a very competitive person, so I could totally see myself getting sucked into this and trying to get my roommates in on it too.
Yeah, exactly. But it needs to be easy, make it attractive, make it social, make it timely. It really should be as many of those things as possible. It should jump out at me. It should be personalized. It should be relevant to me and the choices that I'm able to make. If possible, it should be social. It should be timely. It should hit me, if at all possible, in those moments where I'm making decisions about separation of materials at source.
So how do we create those feedback loops that Sasha's talking about? The ones that hit you right when you're recycling?
Well, remember the computer vision that Emily talked about earlier? Well, that same technology, the ones that robots are currently using at the MRF to pluck out the chili-free Coca-Cola cans, you could also install it at different places like garbage chutes, loading docks, recycling trucks. So then you would have this fine-grained data on how people are recycling. And Emily thinks that could totally change the game.
The primary benefit is to be able to get that data back to the user. Right now, it's going into a black hole if it exists at all. With this data, we can then create the feedback loops. So now you have which building it came from, how much they threw away, and then what was in those waste streams. So now you can convey directly back to the user, this is what you recycled, this is what actually was recycled based on contamination, and these are 3 ways to change it. Because when you have the feedback loop and you're able to convey that information, that's when people really learn.
Yeah, so when we talked with Sasha at the Nudge unit, he told us about all these really cool things that you could do, like gamify your apartment building's recycling, but you need data to do it. Without the data, there's no real-time understanding of what you're recycling correctly or what's going to landfill or whatever.
And it's not just individual users, but restaurants, manufacturers, everybody. Now that you have this data, you're like, hey, manufacturer with green straws, there's a ton of these and they're contaminating our recycling stream. We can't recycle them. Maybe you should not use straws. The most important thing we can do is make sure that the data is getting back to the right people and the people that can make the change. If that's the business that is creating the waste, or if that's the user and the source separator that's actually putting it in the garbage.
So with this kind of data, It hits you right when you're recycling in a clear, maybe gamified way. We can close the recycling loop.
Exactly. So whatever's happening at the MRF, whatever new robots arrived or new policy that's changed the rules, you'll know exactly how you can play your part to make the whole system work better.
Which means less waste ends up in landfills.
Right. Ideally, we get to zero waste. And there are experts out there who believe it can be done.
Everything is cyclical in nature, and if we want to be sustainable, we have to do the same.
This is Clare Miflin, an architect who led the development of New York City's Zero Waste Design Guidelines, a set of best design practices for making reuse and recycling more convenient and less confusing.
My son would say my mum works in garbage.
Okay. Charming.
He just gets a bit tired of all the photographs of waste bins I take.
When I spoke with Clare, she explained that she's not just looking at waste bins, but at all the ways we could make recycling more local and more sustainable.
Having to take things all the way to China to come all the way back again, there's so much potential for everything not to go right. So the smaller the loop and the more local the loop, I think the better. If we could take our waste back up to the Hudson Valley so farms could use it to grow more food and we could have a local loop of organics, that would make so much more sense.
Plus, if you could see your organics going to a good cause, you'd be way more motivated to separate them properly. And for Clare, the best feedback systems are those that inspire us to rely on recycling less and reuse more.
Recycling only is a kind of halfway house. It's not our final goal. Melting everything down, remaking it, often with degradation each time. Most of our recycling, like paper, it can only be recycled, say, 7 times before the fibers get too short. And each time it's kind of downgraded a little bit. It's much better not to go to the recycling step, but to just reuse something.
Clare believes that by knowing how to recycle better, including when recycling is just not enough, we would choose a better loop. We would reuse our things.
But I can't even figure out where to throw out my sandwich wrapper. How plausible is it to really expect people to start wrapping their sandwiches every day at home and to wash and reuse the wax paper rather than just throwing away the wrapper?
It might sound tricky, but we have done it before. For a moment, during World War II, Americans were actually damn good at recycling and reusing.
So I feel like the Second World War is an inspiring situation, and people were galvanized to separate their waste better, and they did. Many people think, oh, we can't do any better, but I don't believe that. I think mindsets can change, and it's only micro decisions we make that could make a huge difference. But I don't think it feels good to throw something away, and which is partially why we don't want to think about it, because garbage is disgusting. It's this mess of smelly disgustingness. But if you separate your bottles and your paper and your compost, those 3 things on their own aren't disgusting.
Right.
So I think once you change your behavior, then it's kind of a self-perpetuating thing, but it's just making that change.
Thank you for listening to City of the Future, a podcast from Sidewalk Labs. Your hosts are Vanessa Quirk and me, Eric Jaffe. We are produced by Benjamin Walker and Andrew Callaway.
This episode was mixed by Zach McNees. Special thanks to all who made this episode possible. Benjamin Miller, Emily Kildow, Sasha Tregebov, and Clare Miflin. And special apologies to my roommates. Sorry, guys.
Our art is by the great Tim Cow. Our music is composed by Adaam James Levine-Areddy. If you want to hear more of Adaam's work, you can check out his band, Lost Amsterdam, at amsterdamlost.com.
This episode wraps up our first season of City of the Future. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please make sure to rate us on Apple and subscribe to our newsletter for updates and sneak peeks of Season 2.
As a side note, Vanessa and I work really hard on that newsletter, or at least Vanessa does. And it's a roundup of the must-read articles in urban tech, so you should definitely subscribe either way.
And if you have any feedback or ideas for us, you can email Eric and I at podcast@sidewalklabs.com. And if you live in New York City, we will actually be doing a panel discussion at the Brooklyn Podcast Festival and a live taping, so we hope to see you there. You can check out details for that in our newsletter and on our social media channels.
See you in the future.